Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that modification homework. You've got good questions, you've got good answers, and now you can start implementing those into your own essays and spoken responses. Suspect 9, clauses and connectors. We've mentioned clauses quite a few times in different parts of these lessons. For example, when we've talked about conditionals, when we've talked about modification, parallel structure, etc. Clauses come up. Well, we have to know how to join these clauses in the correct way. Now, there are different types of connectors. We just think of a general connector and we think of conjunctions. Sometimes clauses should be connected using a comma, sometimes not. Sometimes you should use a conjunction and sometimes a connector. Your own language almost definitely has some differences in how punctuation is applied. Commas, for example, very often need careful study. It's not that difficult as long as you go step by step. For example, in the modification, we always had the comma after the introductory clause and then the subject that was referred to by that clause. Well, there are some other rules. We'll look at them now. Case 1, joining a dependent clause and an independent clause. Remember, dependent means it cannot stand alone. We'll look at this in more detail. Case 2, joining two dependent clauses. Case 3, joining independent clauses with a conjunction. We'll talk about conjunctions and how they go together. And then case 4, joining two independent clauses with a semicolon. We've seen some examples already, but I'll explain those in more detail now. An independent clause can stand alone because we know who or what does what. Now, pause, think about this. We know who or what does what. For example, Karma walks her beat. This is an independent clause. It's a complete idea. We know who walks the beat. So what is done is walking the beat, if you like, and we know who does it. It's a complete independent idea. This clause can stand by itself. A dependent clause, however, cannot stand alone. It needs to be connected to an independent clause. Think about dependency and independency in grammatical terms as the same as in life. As soon as we're able to stand on our own 2 feet, financially, etc., we can consider ourselves independent. Now, in the example here, before eating lunch, well, hold on a second. This is not independent. We don't know who does what. We don't know who eats the lunch, therefore it's dependent. Here's a solution that would work: before eating lunch, comma. In other words, this was actually a modifying clause. It actually told us when something happened in terms of a context. Rest of it, Karma walks her beat. So there we go. The full idea is before eating her lunch, so in other words, she hasn't eaten lunch yet. We then have the independent idea, Karma walks her beat. But let's go for this. Case 1, we're going to look at a dependent plus independent clause. Method 1, start with the independent clause and do not use any punctuation when you connect the dependent. Sally and Diane hid the gun. Example 1. We know who did what. They have a gun, they hid it. When Billy entered the room. Well, when Billy entered the room is not a complete idea, so it's a dependent clause. Just pause if you need to check that. When Billy entered the room, the word when makes it dependent. It's adding information to that particular clause. Therefore, we consider it dependent on that first clause. Likewise, in example 2, Jane helped Tarzan to calm down. We could finish the sentence there. It's a complete idea. We know who did what. As soon as we then say by dividing the cake into 2 equal parts, well, suddenly that second clause has to be connected to something else. It has to have the information from the first clause to exist. It cannot stand by itself. Jane helped Tarzan to calm down by dividing the cake into 2 equal parts. I guess Tarzan can get a little bit angry if he feels something's being stolen from him. Method 2. Start with a dependent clause and do use punctuation when you connect the independent clause. So in a way, it's almost the same as when we had the conditionals, remember? If you start with the if clause, you then use a comma and then you use the result clause. But if you start with the result clause, you don't use a comma before you put the if clause. Think of it in those terms. Example 3. Because the party was winding down, comma, a A lot of us went to the new club by the beach. The first clause cannot stand by itself, however the second could. It's a complete idea. Example 4. While Milan replaced the old lock, Alan helped Sylvia contact the police. The comma tells us, okay, the first clause is dependent and depends on the second clause. The second clause could stand by itself, however here it's creating a bigger picture. Joining two dependent clauses and an independent clause. When you want to add more to the story contained in a sentence, you can add more than just one dependent clause to an independent clause. But remember, the independent clause is still essential to the sentence. Yeah. Example 1. Before adding the ginger, definitely not independent. But after browning the onions, still not independent. We need an independent clause to have all the sense we need for this sentence. Stir the garlic into the mix. That's independent. Stir the garlic into the mix is an instruction. Instructions can stand by themselves. They're complete ideas. Example 2. Having lost, we have the verb plus ing. Therefore, we're going to have a main subject. You can see at the beginning of the green part, it's Adele. Okay. Having lost over 20 pounds during the summer, dependent. For the sake of simple vanity, again, it just gives us some extra information, about Adele. Adele was almost unrecognized by some of her classmates. Why was she almost unrecognized? She'd lost nearly 20 pounds. Why did she lose 20 pounds? Simple vanity. Interesting sentence. Example 3. Jill left the hotel in tears. Now this time we're starting with an independent clause here. So because it's independent, we don't use a comma before we then put in the first dependent. Not because of a lack of sleep, but because of sheer regret. Pause if you need to check the vocabulary. Notice also the paired phrase, not because, but because. Hey, why don't you steal that idea and put it into your own essay? But when you do, make sure that you know you're going to need to have the independent clause to glue everything together, to have something that everything can hold on to and make sense in the sentence. This time, case 3, joining two independent clauses using a coordinating conjunction. Don't get scared about this. A conjunction is just a type of connector. We have the acronym FANBOYS. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Remember them. When you remember to use these conjunctions, you should remember to use them with a comma when joining together two independent clauses. If they're dependent, it's a different story completely. Example 1, John loves everyone, but nobody likes him. Nobody likes him is a complete idea. John loves everyone, there's a contrast, but it's a sad story. Comma there because they're independent. Example 2, the ACT offers 5 answer choices on most math questions. Independent idea, complete idea, comma, and one of our fanboys, the SAT offers 4. We know that we're referring to answer choices here. We next use a comma, then so. Both are predominantly multiple choice tests. So we can just join together all these different independent clauses. We just need to use comma plus coordinating conjunction. We could also use a semicolon. We'll look at that later. You are a very talented person. Example 3. So, after the comma, independent clause, comma, fanboy, so. Take life by the horns, young man. 2 independent ideas. Very simple for you to create these yourself. Remember to use fanboys. The final thing we'll look at here now is, so when we're dealing with independent clauses, use a semicolon sometimes in your academic essay. Obviously, when you're speaking, it's not going to be the same. So, semicolon is like a soft period or a hard comma. And they are a great way to continue the flow of a sentence. Something you'll be given points for in your essay is the flow of the essay, the information, how it all flows through to your final point or points. You can use a longer connector if essential to or helpful for the meaning. Okay, if a connector, a word such as nonetheless, furthermore, however, etc., these longer words, you just use a semicolon and then you put a comma immediately afterwards. Let's look at example 1. Machine A has produced 20 widgets per minute, semicolon. No conjunction, no need to use a connector either. Machine B can produce 40 widgets per minute. Notice that we have two independent ideas. It's essential that they are independent. Okay, they can stand by themselves. Sometimes just put a semicolon there, job done. Example 2, the vast majority of older opponents to the law hold a conservative political position. Semicolon, nonetheless. Okay, so this time what we're doing is we're deciding to emphasize the fact that there's a contrast. Sometimes it can really help the flow of a sentence. Many were openly in support of legalization when they were much younger and attended university. Some longer sentences, some longer ideas. We're just looking at how we can join them. Example 3. Love is a 4-letter word. Complete idea. It's a beautiful idea. Semicolon. Furthermore, let's add some interesting information. Comma. Love is both a verb and a noun. With that poignant point, let's close. Try the quiz, please. As always, there'll be an additional PDF with all the explanations, all the questions, and we'll start to put together everything you've learned, steal as many ideas as you can, start to look at them in terms of ways for you to build good paragraphs in good essays under time pressure. Practice makes perfect. Will get you where you need to get to.